Hi, I'm Sarah Veblen, and I have Kris Haight with me here. We have done a couple of conversations about different topics and have gotten really good feedback about them. So we've decided to do some more. So, hi, Kris.
Hi, Sarah. It's great to see you again.
What's on your mind today? We talked about a couple of different things. Where do you want to go?
Yeah, so one of the things I was excited about the other day, I was doing something and I thought I need a podcast to listen to. So I do listen to the Sewing with Threads podcast, and I picked it up on my phone and I saw you there, which was fabulous. And so I really enjoyed that podcast where you talked about a variety of things. And one of the topics that you talked about that is of interest to me is master patterns. You and I talked a little bit earlier about kind of how you get that and what it is. But for me right now, my goal is actually to have a master pattern for skirt, master pattern for pants, and master pattern for bodice. And then I feel like I'm not sure what I would exactly do with all of those later. It kind of opens up a big space in terms of how I would use that. And part of that would be that I would know that I have something that fits my body, and I would move away from and potentially never use again the patterns that you get from, a variety of people, companies that create that. They might inspire my style or my decisions, my design decisions, but in terms of knowing I have a base that fits me. So right now, maybe what we could start with what I would consider probably the easier one and the one that I've had the longest, and that's a skirt. So I
Mhm.
just have a basic without a waistband, couple of darts, just a basic short skirt. And it'd be great to hear how you think about a master pattern for a skirt and what you might do with it.
Okay, so a skirt is for anybody who is embarking on fitting. I'm going to just say a couple of things about fitting. Skirt is the easiest garment to fit, generally speaking, and it teaches you a lot about the fitting process that I use using horizontal balance lines. So it's a great first project. And I recommend that you develop a straight skirt. There's no flare to the side seams. There's no pegging. It's just straight. Even if you've said, I will never wear just a straight boxy skirt, because then once you have it fitting well, then you can change it up and make the style that you want. So the hard work is in the fitting. And that's what is time consuming. And once you have mastered that, I feel my thinking is, why do you want to then buy a pattern for a princess skirt and go through that whole fitting process again? So with taking a straight skirt that fits well, what I would encourage anybody to do if they want a princess skirt is to put in your princess lines. And in my complete photo guide to perfect fitting book, I have some photos of somebody holding a couple of yardsticks up, or me holding it up. So you are narrow and then you go wide. And so you're trying to find that perfect little spot of where it makes you look proportionate.
Yeah.
And so if you get too narrow, you're likely to look hippier. If you get too wide, your stomach area is likely to look big.
Right.
So there's always a sweet spot. Now, sometimes that's where, if you have front darts on your skirt, sometimes that's where the darts are, and sometimes it's not. It doesn't make any difference. And you do the same thing on the back, finding the place that creates a really pleasing visual proportion. The same thing, if you go too wide, you'll tend to make your buttocks look more sticky outy. If you go too narrow, you're going to make your hips look wider. Now, sometimes somebody wants something like that, And that's
Uh-huh.
perfectly fine. If you want, oh, I want to look as hippie as I can, then keep that in mind and choose your placement.
Right.
Once you've established that placement, you draw it on your skirt. You could do pins or a ribbon or something so that you don't have your mess up your mock-up. So we're
Mhm.
doing all of this with a mock-up on the body. That's really important. You can't,
Mhm.
I encourage you not to just hold a pattern up, make a mock-up so you can really see your body and do that test of where you want the princess seams. Mark your muslin and then transfer those lines to the pattern. And they generally are going to be straight parallel to the grain line, the princess lines are. And
Uh-huh.
then if they intersect a dart, so if the dart is here and your princess line intersects it, then the one princess line is going to come up here and the other princess line is going to come up here. So then you don't have a dart in your skirt. If the
Oh,
dart is here relative to the princess line, then you
yeah.
can take out all of that darting from one side, or usually you can still split it.
Mhm.
And the same is true on the back. There
Mhm.
is an exception on the back if you use a dart that is between the buttock and the side seam to fit a high hip, then you'll
Yeah.
probably want to keep that. It's a little short dart.
Right.
Without, usually it doesn't have a whole lot of intake and it's short. And so you usually will just keep that. It's perfectly fine to have a dart and a princess seam. And for
Okay.
somebody with really full buttocks, they might have 2 darts plus a princess seam if they have a wide, full hip on the side. So I
So,
think
yeah.
part of what is, when I say something like that, part of what's hard to understand is we get so programmed in our minds what patterns should look like. And I encourage you, just take an eraser and get rid of that. Think about what your body is. If you have 3 darts in the back of your skirt, 1 over the buttock and 2 others coming around the side, then that's perfectly fine. That's what fits you. And just because other sort of commercial standardized patterns don't have those extra 2 darts, there's no rule that says that you cannot have them or that you should get rid of them. That's what you need to fit your body.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you say that, because so much of what we see, whether we go clothes shopping or whether we look at a pattern, I think probably unconsciously narrows our ideas. I know it does for me, and I think, oh, well, that's the way that it should be, right? Someone figured that out. And one of the things that you said was um, to be looking at it and creating a pleasing visual proportion. And that's really an individual application of that, because
Mhm.
no one has my body. I know that. And I have either lumps or bumps or, big, like, for example, the front of my thighs are bigger. So on a skirt, I have to really think about that in terms of how I have enough girth there without getting it too puffy. So that's an interesting idea, to be, just as you said, erasing all that and saying, okay, I have my master pattern and I have my body. I want to create something. I want to design something that fits me, that actually looks good just on me.
Yes, exactly. Now, speaking to your full thigh and it's full out in the front,
Yes,
you in a straight skirt with just your side seams, you have to get the girth from side seam over to side seam that you need to accommodate that. And so there might be times that you feel like it's a little bit loose on the side, but when you sit
right,
down or you walk, you need that space.
right.
So there are times I think about my style that I'm in creating, in this case, a princess seam. I can also use it as an additional fitting tool. So
Mm-hmm.
you've got a princess seam, and those seams are going kind of more or less down the middle of your legs. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where your fullness is. So
Right.
then you could, instead of having a straight, here's the dart, and then it's coming down straight, you could actually, in your princess seam, come out and give that fullness that you need, the circumference you need to accommodate the thigh, the forward
Right.
thigh. And then
Right.
quite likely you could take in your side seams because you've given yourself the circumference where your body needs it.
And the princess seam allows you to do that. Otherwise, I can't do anything in that particular area because there's no seam. There's nothing I can adjust there.
Right. And
Yeah,
similarly,
that's
people who have really nice rounded buttocks and a full buttock, very often they'll get their HBLs all nice and level and they'll move around and the back will creep up. And
right.
a princess seam is ideal for that fitting issue because you can, similarly to the forward thigh, you can add to your princess seams there over the buttock and give yourself the circumference you need where you need it with that sticky out butt. And
Right.
then often you can take in your side seams because before the princess seam, you needed the total circumference.
So that is something I've always noticed about my figure when I have a garment on. Generally you walk up to a mirror and you just see the front space, right? Then I turn to the side and I think, oh, that looks a little different. Maybe it fits better, maybe it doesn't fit better. And I've just recently been more attentive to what it looks like from the back because I usually do those two and I think, oh, good to go. I'm ready to move on. But actually, it's really front, side, or sides, and back, and those give you different perspectives on where I need more girth or where I have less need for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
So this is a good conversation to have at this point, I think, in talking about a master pattern, because you can create that master pattern and then personalize that using a seam line or a style line to further gain you a better fit because of your body's idiosyncrasies. So
Right.
in this case, the princess seams would be really helpful to you.
Right.
So
And
you go ahead.
I was going to say, and so to me, that's about the vertical lines. And then sometimes I also feel horizontally, that I might want something to be helpful either around my belly or, as you said, a high hip. Is that another way that you think about a style line would be the use of a yoke or the use of a horizontal line?
Yeah. And so a yoke is a really good example. If you have, like me, if you kind of have a little belly coming out and
Right.
you don't want that skirt to then kind of hug back in under the belly, you can create a yoke. And a drafting book might tell you that that yoke should be 3 inches from the waist, but you can make it whatever you want. And of course, I'm going to encourage you to think about where that is. And what I found is if you put that yoke seam at what I call the crest of the belly, so not below where it's caving back in and not too high up, but kind of at the crest of the belly, then the skirt's going to hang down from that.
Right.
And so you can use verticals for princess seams. You can use horizontal lines for a yoke. That yoke can be a consistent depth all the way from the waist, or it can vary. So you can have a yoke start higher in the front and come down more sloping in the back, if that is what creates a flattering line for you. And so some people, including you, might be thinking, oh, so this is really cool because I can further enhance the visual look of my body. But I also am asking you to think about this and to take control of it. That's where my example of some books will tell you a yoke is X number of inches from the waist. That's where you draw it, separate your patterns, and add your seam allowances, and then you can close your darts up. But my whole take on garment sewing is I want you to be thinking about what you want. I want you to be making these personalized decisions. And it can feel, I know from talking to students, I know from myself when I first started to do this, it can seem really daunting. There's so many choices. But if you can sort of get your feet wet, make those first steps into experimentation, it doesn't take long for most people to realize, boy, I can do, the sky is the limit. I can do almost anything now.
That's really, really exciting. Right now, I have a really good master pattern for pants, and I've made 6 pair with them. And I love most of them. The fit is excellent. I've had assistance with that. And just as you were talking about all of those things, all those same principles in a skirt apply to pants for me. So where do I want the waistband? Does the waistband need to be the same width all around? Do I want to add a yoke to my pants, which they don't have right now?
Do you want to put a front princess seam in to accommodate the forward thigh?
Right. I was going to say that that right now would be probably the one area that I would immediately start with is, okay, I like what I have. How would adding a princess seam help me with fit? And then also what they look like. I like the look of a slack, which is what they are. And I'm wondering how adding that would help me in terms of the look that I want, but also to start now to make them look different or make them look unique, right? Either adding a contrasting fabric or trim or just something, and I was playing around with the hem and the side seam. Only because that was what I've seen on Pinterest, or that's what I've, seen on, excuse me, cute pants. And now I think, wow, there's all these options that I could use for the top of the pant as well.
Yes, and especially if you tuck your blouse in, and that's going to show that you've got all kinds of design decisions, or design possibilities. So if you like to tuck your blouse in, instead of having a straight waistband, you could have a seam at center front, and the waistband could come in and barely come down. So you get this pretty little curve. You could put 2 little buttons on either side of the waistband there. So it becomes a possible decorative element.
Yeah. And I think with when I start with a master pattern, I look at it and it looks plain, right? Which it should. And then I think, okay, I made 6 of those. I'd like to make those again because of the fit and because I like that. But I'd like to add some interest, some visual interest, some design ideas. And I'd like to do that just because it would be fun to do that. But I'd also like to do that just so that I build new skills, so that I try different techniques, either whether it's a design technique or whether it's a construction technique.
Exactly. And I was just going to say, often what I encourage my students to do is make one design decision instead of incorporating 4. Right. Do one. So make your yoke, make a pair of pants that it just has the plain yoke, then say, now I wonder if I could put a pocket coming down out of the yoke. Or what if I did the yoke more slanted? Could I get a pocket coming in off of that? So you build the confidence. Okay, I designed a yoke, split the pattern, added my seam allowance, closed up my darts in the yoke. Everything fits. You got an extra pair of pants in your wardrobe, and you've been able to proof that pattern out by actually making a pair of pants and wearing it. Then you can say to yourself, okay, now what else could I do with this yoke? So you stair step it. And then in each increment of design that you decide to add, you have built in the confidence that it's going to work because the prior iteration worked, or if it didn't work, you fooled around, you fiddled around until you figured out what would help. And if you're totally new,
go ahead.
If you're totally new to design decisions, one of the easiest things to do is make a change in your hemline and make a nice little design decision. For in one style of my slack pants that I wore for many, many years, I started to put a side slit in the bottom 2.5 inches or so. And then I usually kept it straight, but you could have it curved and have a facing on it. Then I often would put some little buttons at the top of that slit so that I made a statement out of it instead of just making the same pair of pants over and over and over again.
Right. And that, excuse me, I'm going to grab some water in a sec. My throat's funny.
We both will take this water break.
Yeah. So that idea of proofing, I think, is a really interesting way to think about this, and what it means in terms of how I look at my sewing over time and how I kind of plan what I make.
Yes. So I'm going to go back to your skirt, your master pattern skirt with side seams and darts, and you're going to make a princess pattern. I would do the first one straight, maybe peg it a tiny bit if that gave you a nicer silhouette, but don't make another design decision. So you're going to proof out that those princess seams with that are accommodating your forward thigh, maybe taking in your side seams a little bit. So you're proofing that out. You're making a skirt so you can wear it. Then you can say to yourself, well, I wonder, I know that worked. So now I've got my princess seams. The sides are a little slimmer in Kris's case, because she was able to accommodate the forward thigh. You may find your body might, whoever's listening, your body is going to be different. And so you can accommodate whatever you need to, or maybe you don't have any personalized accommodation. But then you can say, I wonder what a fit and flare skirt would look like. So then I have my princess seams. And so I come in a little bit around the knee, and then I have it come out, flip out a little bit. So some people call that a tulip skirt or a trumpet skirt. And you can have that part that flares out come from the thigh, the high thigh, the mid thigh, just above the knee. If you wear your skirts lower, be careful. You can get them way too tight. You usually want that flaring above the knee, because if you get that pegging in on the side and then it comes out, you can peg in your princess seams a little bit wherever you want, your front and your back, or just the sides. But sometimes just taking 1/8 of an inch out of that princess seam in the front and then the back as it's coming down before it kicks out to get that tulip shape is really pretty. And so then you could make your tulip skirt like that.
Yeah.
Another way to think about the tulip skirt is, I want that same sort of look once you had that tulip skirt, and okay, this is the amount of circumference that I need to walk in, at the knee, right above the knee. Then you could say, well, I can put a horizontal seam there, split the lower part of the seam off, and make a flounce or pleat it, have a pleat that gets added all the way around, or just in the center front and in the back. And a flounce is not gathered. It's just a slash and spread of the pattern, or you can spread the entire pattern all the way across and gather it back in. And then you've got, I've just given 3 different examples of what you can do with that horizontal line, because you found you've done your first test and you go, okay, that's a really good place for that horizontal line for the bottom part of the skirt to attach to. And so then you've got all of these design options that you can play, because you know you've proofed out that initial skirt. The princess seam worked, then you've got your little fit and flare perhaps, and then you've got a horizontal seam. You know that's at the right place, the horizontal seam, or maybe you've had to adjust it a little bit. And then you've got a whole entire bank of different design things that you can do with the skirt.
So one of the things that reminds me of is I forget which class, it was a sewing pattern review or maybe a Threads article. You talked about stepping back and reflecting on what worked when you make a garment, because it is absolutely true for me that I always focus on what didn't work. And so part of why I want to master pattern is I'd really like my own style, right? I really like when I put my pants on to think that is me. That is 100%. I love this. I love that. I love this. And then put together, it's really my individual style. It's no one else's style. Plus it fits and it's comfortable, right? Which for me would be critical features. And I'm just thinking that through all that proofing, you'd really have kind of a short list or maybe a long list that says, these are the things I always want to do, because I've found that this is pleasing when I look at it. This addresses my unique body. And then it also really kind of kicks into what I think is my style. For example, what you said about the pants at the bottom and the outside seam, that might be something that helps me walk, for one thing, comfort. But it also might be something that I think, in most of the pants I make, I really like that design idea. Or I really like the idea of the tulip skirt. And I really like the idea of pegging it in a little bit prior to coming out. That is a good look for me. I want to repeat that idea.
Yes. And so you're building from one garment to the next. But if you're doing the homework I suggest of writing down what worked well in a garment, what you wish that you had done, or how could you improve it, then in your next iteration, you can incorporate some of those changes. Maybe you do 2 or 3 proofs of your princess seam. Maybe you move your princess seam slightly from the first one. But I can almost guarantee you that all 3 of those skirts are still going to fit you, because you've started with your master pattern. You know that that base fit is correct.
Right. But the actual experience of wearing it actually tells me something different.
That's right.
And some of that's about the fabric, some of that's about the fit, some of that's about the design decisions. Is it a summer garment? Is it a winter garment? What else do I have to wear with that looks good, or what do I need to add? So I think the wearing feedback, which I've just started to pay attention to now, is helpful for me.
I think it's really important. I will tell a story about myself. I was writing a magazine article, and it was based on a bodice, a darted bodice master pattern. And I was making, they call them 3 beauty garments. So finished garments with different design details. So I worked in my muslins. I did not proof it and just make a plain old shirt out of say a cotton and wear it around, because I was on a deadline to get that magazine article done. So I just jumped right into these 3 designs, and each one was really fun. It said what I wanted it to say. And when the first time I wore each one of those garments, I almost pulled the seam out back here where the sleeve attached, because I had not given myself enough width. Right. So moral of that story is, if I had done what I always am telling people to do, if I'd done it myself, I'd just taken a nice piece of cotton and made a plain blouse to proof out that those sleeves were comfortable, I wouldn't have encountered that. So that's part of the proofing. As you just said, it's so important to wear the garment. And, I always give the example of going to the grocery store, you lifting things, you're lifting bags out of the car and bringing them into the house. real life types of daily activities. So that for me, it's picking up grandchildren. Can I still pick them up in this?
Right.
Unless it's a special occasion garment or a very specific garment. I have a sheath dress that I wore to somebody's wedding, and it worked out great, but I don't know that I could pick up my grandchildren. And it was a little too fitted for that.
Yeah. So one of the other things that I'm working on right now is the master bodice, which to me feels a little bit like, Mount Denali, or it seems like so big. And I'm working on a darted bodice, and I'm working on a princess seam bodice. And I don't know if this is true, but I feel like there's a lot of design and interest in what you have on a bodice that's important in terms of how you look, right? Because you want it to direct people to your face. And generally speaking, I mean, you and I right now, no one has any idea what we have on the bottom, right? It's just our upper body.
Right.
And oftentimes that's how we see people. Can you talk a little bit, when you think about going from something that is simpler like the skirt or even the pants and jumping up to a bodice? How does that, what do you do with a master bodice?
So with the master bodice, I just talked about how I didn't proof out my pattern. So for one, you proof it out, and then you can make the first iteration that I often suggest is to make a princess seam. And that can be an arm side princess seam, a shoulder princess, or even I use a neck princess. And you did work on from your darted pattern into your princess seam. And when I got those first pictures, this may not be exactly how you said it, but with great surprise, you said, it really is close. It works. It's like
Right.
me.
Right.
Well, of course it is, because you worked off of your your darted master pattern.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're correct that with a bodice, there are so many different variables that we have to be thinking about. One is our neckline,
Mm-hmm.
and any neckline has a number of variables: how close it is to the neck, how wide it is, how low it is, how wide it is in the mid neck. So that's a variable. This is a variable. That's a variable. The back has its similar variables.
Right.
So we have the neckline, and then we have the hemline. What are you going to wear that garment with? For me, most of the time, I need a different length of shirt for a skirt than I do pants. I wear all of my tops out. I don't tuck them in. But with skirts, I generally need a shorter hem length. I've had a couple of blouses where I can go either direction with either pants or skirts, but neither is ideal. So I just sort of struck a balance in the middle. So you can think about what type of garment you're going to wear it for. For some people, they can have the same length for both skirt and pants. For some of us, it doesn't work.
Right.
But your neckline, your hem shape, are you going to keep a straight hem? Are you going to have side slits? Are you going to do a shirt tail hem? Are you going to have it lower in the back, have a high low, something like that? Those are just good examples of a hemline design change.
Right.
And then you have different elements. If you are going to have a front opening, do you have it just button, or do you want to placket? How wide do you want that placket to be? Or do you want just the garment to a butt? And if it does just a butt, and you can use really pretty frogs or different button closures, do you want a modesty panel under there? So your opening, how you're going to get into the garment, is something that I think is really worth thinking about and planning. And you might be able to do a progression So building on each one step after the other, proofing out your pattern. So if you have a front opening blouse, you might then say, okay, now I'm going to develop a placket for this. And then you might say, okay, that placket worked. What if I had a placket that came up and around a neckline? So instead of having the placket up to the collar,
Right.
you could have the placket come up and then spread out. So does that really, is that really a placket, or is it just a facing that gets top stitched? So you can do it either way. And it's a matter of, you might just say to yourself, well, I think first I'll just do a facing with that shape to check that the neck, I like the neckline, and you can top stitch it and get that kind of effect of of a placket. And then you could say, okay, that worked. I know I like the neckline. Now I'll do the pattern work where this is a separate piece. So you've proofed out that you've liked that neckline shape and the width of that facing of the top stitch facing, then that becomes your pattern.
Right.
Or gives you a mechanism for deciding where you're going to put that line on your pattern paper and split your pattern apart.
When you think about pleasing visual proportion on a bodice, are there particular parts that you think are the biggest drivers in that?
Yes. I think the neckline is probably the biggest driver.
Okay.
Yes. And that has to do with your bust line. Gals who are fuller busted generally are going to want a more open neckline. Because if that neckline's too high and they're full busted, it's going to make them look fuller in kind of an awkward way. And this, these kinds of comments don't hold true 100%, but in my experience, usually a fuller busted person does a little bit better with opening of the lengthening, opening up the neckline in the height of it. One of my favorite things to do with students, and I did with custom clients, is to make your master bodice pattern, and then so it comes to a jewel neckline type shape, and then come up with 3, 4, 5 necklines, and you can often get 3, at least 2, if not 3 or 4 from one pattern. And so I might say, okay, I want a little, instead of a jewel neckline, I want one a little bit lower. So I would cut down to there and fold that under, and then I would fold it around to where the neckline was. Do I like that? And if I do, I'll take a fine tip Sharpie and I will draw it in a color. And then I would say, well, what happens if I move that neckline over along the shoulder line? So then I have a little bit more neckline. More opening, and then I'll take I may have to clip the fabric in order to test that, and then I'll take a different color fine tip Sharpie and I will draw it. Now it may come down to exactly the same height, or it might be a tiny bit lower. And so you can work incrementally with, after you've done that and have discovered those, you can usually do a V neckline. You can always go to the ironing board and take some fusible interfacing and fuse those clips back together if you want. And so you can play with the variables of a V neckline. This is my V neckline. It's not very V'd. It's a very soft V. But for years, I thought I can't wear a V neckline, but I actually really like this neckline. But it's not that kind of sharp, pointed V. And so you can play around with, you want a straight edge ruler coming into roundness here, or do you want roundness here coming into a straight little V point? There are lots of variations of necklines, and then you can play around with square necklines. So if you certainly can get 2 necklines, and you probably can get 3 or 4. You're going to use a different color Sharpie to, after you've turned under, clipped and turned under, and you have to clip because that's a curve here. In order to get it to turn under smoothly, you have to make some clips. and
Mhm.
then turn that under and then draw your other line. Sometimes I'll do 2 colors on one side and 2 colors here. And then afterwards, I have I take my mock-up off and press that neckline. If I need to, fuse it all back together, and I'll see that I have 2, 3, 4 different possible necklines for myself. But I've been able to discover them
Mhm.
by literally manipulating them on my body.
You know, I agree with you that I think the neckline is the most important thing in terms of visual proportion because of how we see how you see yourself in your bathroom mirror, for example, or on a Zoom call or just seeing someone. I will also have experience that sometimes it takes me some time to figure out, do I like that? Do I not like that? If I don't like that, what would I change? That I'm not able to do that one quick. It's not
Yeah,
just one look.
right. It's not. And comparison is really worthwhile. So if you're trying to do a lower jewel neckline, try one that is X amount down and draw it in, fold it under, take it off, get a really nice line with a ruler, clip, turn those under and give it a light press, put it back on and take a photo. And then say to yourself, now, what if I came 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch lower? And then go through that process again, getting a nice clipping, getting a nice curve, pressing it under, take another picture. Then you can look at them side by side, whether you turn them off, look at them on your screen, computer screen. And then that way you can say, oh, that one it looks better. Then I would elect to make that in a simple shirt and wear it. Do I like wearing it? Because that's another element. And I kid you not, sometimes 1/8 of an inch difference in lowering or widening can make a really big difference in what your visual proportion is. But again, I'm asking you to think about things. I'm asking you to look and think about it.
Right. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes you get tired of looking at yourself.
Yes. And that's where I think it's so nice to do the wearing,
Yes.
because at least for me, a lot of times then I forget that I've got it on. I'm not concentrating when I'm in a mock-up looking at a neckline. It's like, eagle eyes in on this. Whereas when I've got it on, I might catch a glimpse of myself in a mirror 2 or 3, 4 times in the day. And that way I can see myself sort of walking past like this or coming straight up.
Yes. Yes. Also, sometimes you'll just get random feedback from someone on the street or in an office who makes a comment that might not be specific. They don't say, wow, that neckline is perfect on you. But they might say, you look really good today. Just a more of a global comment. And you think, okay, I got to remember that. This is what I'm wearing when they said that.
Yes. Yeah. I think that is really important. I often write down how I'm feeling when I wear something. So some of it's that looking, but you and I've talked about this before. It's feeling. How do I feel when I wear this?
Yes.
There are other getting in and out of a car or the subway, whatever mode of transportation you use, getting up on a bus steps or something, that those are important. For me, when I rarely wear a neckline any lower than this because I work with people, students now. I don't do very much custom work very often, but I know for me, I'm often teaching something about pattern work, and I don't want to bend over and have anybody see down my blouse. It's just something that I tend to be really conservative with.
Right.
And so I tried this neckline a little bit lower and I thought that I would like it. And I don't know that you could really see down my blouse, but it made me uncomfortable.
Right.
I always wondered, and I thought, okay, so then raise it up a little bit. It's still, I still like the shape of it, and I think it's flattering on me, but it was that comfort that really crowned what my final choice was to make over and over again.
Yeah, and that comfort comes from an awareness to that, or at least, listening to that voice in your head, right, that says, there's something just, I'm not comfortable in this, and then kind of figuring out why you're not.
And sometimes that can take a while.
Yes. Yes. I think it's for me anyways, it's easier when it feels really good. You're like, yes, this feels really good. There's kind of a solid feeling with that. But other times I think, I don't know what this is. I don't understand it yet.
Yes. And in fact, when I made my first pair of Eureka pants,
Mm-hmm.
I knew that something was not right in the fit in the waist. It just felt a tiny bit too big.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot tell you how I wore them maybe 8 times before I figured it out. And I would have them on, and partway through the day, I'd pinch out the side seams. And then I would think, oh, I could do that, but it doesn't really do what I wanted. It doesn't make me feel like that's right, but
Oh.
that feels good. And I thought, well, maybe I could take in my back darts a little bit, and I would pin that and wear it around. And finally, one day, and this is, I think, a good example, because I wasn't thinking about it, but I had an itch at the back of my waistband. My skin just got itchy, and I reached my hand and put it right down the back of the waistband like that. And I thought, oh, that feels better. So I then realized that where I needed to take it out was in my center back seam.
Mm-hmm.
But literally, this was 8 wearings into it, and I had experienced doing things like this enough that when I played with the side seams and I thought, it's better, but it's not right. And then the darts, it's like I didn't do those changes. I just kept wearing them and kept thinking about them. And then luckily, I guess I got an itch on in the back and the waistband, and or the facing, and pulled it out that way. And I thought, ooh, that really does feel better.
And that's a great example of how many choices there are to get to a fit that you're comfortable with, and how unique it is based on our bodies. Because you kind of went through the litany of, well, it's usually this, and then, okay, secondarily, it's this. You went through your algorithm of things to check. None of them really gave you the comfort. None of them gave you the final feeling that this was it.
Yeah. And how you said, when a garment fits well, it's like you just know it. I always feel like I feel right in my body then.
Right.
And I think most of us have experienced that, whether we're garment sewers or we're buying clothes, some things just feel better. I think of this as doing detective work.
Mm-hmm.
And it does take thought, and it takes some experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
And once you figure out a few things,
Mm-hmm.
I think it then starts to come more easily, figuring out whether something, what you could do to change a garment to get that feeling of this feels right.
The more that I think about this, the wearing feedback is probably, when you say proofing, right? So we think of, I was thinking earlier of proofing in terms of, what was the choice you made? How did you execute that choice, right? But in the end, what we really want is a garment that we think, yeah, I feel good in this, and that's what we're striving for. And all the other things are a little bit academic, or, uh, and you're striving actually for a feeling in your garment. That's really what you're going for. Not that, oh yes, this fits me so well. Right. I mean, that's, there's no, so, are there is my horizontal balance line right? Are there strain lines? You know, you go through all those things, but that's not really it. It is really, I feel great when I wear this.
Yes. And that's the elusive part when I'm fitting students in workshops or one-on-one. I often will pin something and I'll then often ask and they'll say, the person will volunteer, that feels better or that feels good. And I say, well, does it feel good enough? I mean, was that enough of an improvement that you feel like it's worth making a garment to see? And sometimes they say, well, it feels better, but now that I think about it, it's something still isn't right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there are, when you're at that point, a 16th or an 1/8 of an inch often is the change that you need. Very often it's not a very big change at that point.
Mm-hmm. And that's important to remember too, because it's easy to overcorrect.
Yeah.
And then I find I'm in a zone where I don't kind of know where I am anymore. And a few times I just said, okay, I'm going to go back to where I was and start from there again because I'm lost. You know,
Yes.
I
And
lost.
I've had many students who I said, I really think you just need to start again. And they feel very discouraged. I understand that. But when they started again, they were able to get to a good end product and got to it faster. So especially if people out there listening to this, if you're learning to do your own fitting or you're helping somebody else fit, if you do a whole bunch of fitting changes to a mock-up and you think something just isn't right, I really encourage you, even though you may be at 2 or 3 mock-ups down the road, go back to that base, that starting place, and go again. So you start with your original pattern commercial pattern you bought, make a brand new mock-up, and the few things that you know really help, you do those first. And I can guarantee you that your fitting will go faster and you will get a better fit because you're learning all along in that first go round. And so when you go back and start afresh, rather than thinking, okay, great, here I am back at square zero and I did, all of this work on it. Don't think of that as discouragement. Think of it as my fingers and my eyes have learned a lot. And now I can incorporate that. Your fingers will manipulate the fabric faster or more efficiently, or you'll have a better feel for how your fingers are manipulating the fabric.
There's really just a lot to learn.
It's garment making and fitting and pattern work is terribly complex.
Right.
We have so many facets of it.
Right. But it can be learned. Obviously.
Absolutely.
Right.
You and I've talked about this before. I firmly believe anybody can learn this stuff. Right. I know I'm not a complete dullard, but I have worked at this for a long time to get to where I have the body of knowledge I did. You were in nursing. How long would it take me to get to where you were? My goodness.
Right.
So I think sometimes how garment sewing is presented to sewers is it should be quick and easy. Did you remember, was it Simplicity Patterns that came out with a 3-hour pattern?
Yeah, easy, fast. I mean, it was all.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, that's a rare occurrence for me, unless it's a pattern I've proofed out any number of times, or my t-shirts I can make in about 3.5 or 4 hours, but that's out of the norm. So, but rather than letting yourself get discouraged that it is taking you a long time, take pleasure in that you've got, for every one of those iterations of taking your master pattern and doing a little design change. When it works, that's really worth celebrating.
Well, and for me, sometimes I reflect on, when you see couture garments, right? Or you see either celebrities or important people, and they look so good. And I think, okay, you got to remember that that was not a fast and easy pattern that someone threw together in 2 hours. And in addition to actually sewing the garment, there have been multiple fittings, multiple adjustments to that. And the reason that looks good is because of the expertise of the people that worked on that garment for that individual. So you'll see a statement that says, so-and-so is wearing this. And it's like, yes, they're wearing that, but they had a fitter and they had someone who either added fabric or took away fabric or make some change or change the neckline, change the hemline, something, so that you go, wow, that's absolutely beautiful. And it's really easy to forget that and to think, okay, I'm going to get that in my 5-hour pattern.
Yeah. So there's another way you can use master patterns, if we want to go into that for a few minutes.
I'd love to.
Which is you can use your master pattern to help you get started on another commercial pattern and make some initial adjustments. So I think that this, using your master pattern to adjust a commercial pattern is a starting place. I think it is tricky. I think it can help you get started. I think rarely will it be the ultimate and that you won't have to make a mock-up or two. So, preface this. But it will help you gauge if you have a bodice master pattern and you feel like the front width here is really good on you, over to the shoulder line, so center front over to the armhole and the shoulder line and your side seam, same on the back, that your master pattern has that width is really good for you. Then you can take your master pattern, put it on a new commercial pattern that you are considering making, and you'll line up either center front in a bodice or center back. And you may need to do some jiggling as to where it goes up and down, because it's unlikely that the shoulder seam and the neckline and the armhole, the side seam, the bust, apex, all of those things aren't going to line up on the commercial pattern. And you probably in the back of your mind know that if you just made the size, it's not going to fit. So what I usually do is always center front or center back. And then I usually align the apex. And then if I happen to be really short from here to here. So if the shoulder seam of the commercial pattern is up here and the armhole is out here, I say, okay, I know that my master pattern fits me and the height between bust and the shoulder isn't as high and the width from center front over to the armhole is not as high. Those are the things that I would change. If you get nervous about, say, you've got a 1-inch change and you think, oh, what am I going to do? What I would encourage you to do is two things: to work on 2 mock-ups simultaneously. Jump in and go on and change it.
Right.
So you'll copy your pattern, so that you preserve the commercial pattern. You've got your mock-up, so you've made a copy of the commercial pattern. Just go on and change it exactly, the shoulder height, the width here, and the width here, because you've got center front and your apex lined up. Just jump in and see what happens. And the second mock-up, you could be what I think of as hedging. You could say, well, the style of this other garment is supposed to be a little bit off the shoulder. A little bit looser or something like that. And so you'll say, okay, maybe I'm really nervous about taking 2 inches off. Maybe I'll take 1.5 inches off the height of the shoulder, or you may need to add if you're long here. And then if you think, oh, it seems ridiculous to take off, 2 inches in the armhole, go to 1.5 inches or go to 1 inch and make that mock-up.
Mhm.
So you make those educated guesses. You, on the other version of it, you just jump in, trust that master pattern. You make both mock-ups
Right.
and you put them on and you
Mhm.
see which is closer. It's a good, it's more work, but it's a good way to help you gain confidence in your master pattern and realize what areas of the fit of your master pattern are really important to you.
Mm.
So to me, it's really important to have center front to this front crease of the armhole correct, because I
Mhm.
don't like, generally speaking, I don't like off the shoulder garments.
Right.
So that would tell me, okay, I left it wider and I put this on and all of this is too big on me. Then that tells me in the version where I went on and used my master pattern to change the commercial pattern
Mhm.
that I like that width better. Now, maybe there are other aspects of it that I don't like as much, but I do like the sort of hedged version of the using the master pattern. And it just gives you information. It gives you a way to analyze and see what it is you like and what it is you don't like in terms of the fit variations.
So it's really a learning exercise. And what I hear you saying is that you really start from the center out, that you kind of orient yourself here. But I also heard you saying that you're using the knowledge that you gained in creating the master bodice to say, generally speaking, I'm shorter here, I'm longer here, or I find this more flattering than that. And that you're applying that then as you frankly compare the commercial pattern to your master pattern, then you're making decisions, perhaps style related, to what you may or may not use that for. Is that fair?
Yes, that's correct.
It's interesting.
Now, if there's a pattern that I'm interested, a commercial pattern that I'm interested in, that the example I usually give is like a Issey Miyake pattern where, you know, things are folding. And so I usually will just make the commercial pattern.
Yeah.
There's so many twists and turns and interesting folds. I'm not, other people might be interested in recreating that from their master pattern, but to me, I would just make an appropriate size
Right.
straight out of the envelope and see what I get, at least initially. I think some of the patterns that have twists in that front neckline
Yeah.
or somewhere, again, I might just make it and see.
And you're really letting the unique design lead on that is
Mhm.
where you're going. Because I don't know if this is true, but perhaps for a lot of those, it's not really about fit. It's really about the look and the design and the unique interest. I mean, that's kind of the forward message that you're getting in some of those.
Yes. And so a lot, especially I think of as summer dresses that have these interesting, you know, hems folding up or ruching or different folds and pleats. That's the statement of the dress. And if you know that works for you or you don't know it works for you and you take a stab at it, it's what muslins are for. And I've said this in another way, but don't be discouraged. Don't think that it was a waste of time if you make that muslin and you go, this isn't for me.
Mhm.
So that's one reaction. I would say at least stop and figure out what is not for you. What is it that is not working for you, what you like to see on your body.
Right.
I am fascinated by all of these dresses and pants that have more width in the dresses, more width at the hem, and these interesting folds. And it took me a long time to understand that it really doesn't work for me and to figure out why. So it was easier to say, I don't like that on myself. And then it was harder to figure out why. And ultimately, I figured out I have little tiny bird legs and my ankles are tiny. And so there's all of this fabric lower down and then these little sticks poking out. Whereas I have understood from fitting people now especially with some of the lantern pants silhouettes, if you have fuller calves, fuller ankles, almost always those styles look better on that kind of figure. I'm determined this summer to figure out a lantern pant shape that works for me. So we'll see if I can get that. There's some variation out there that will work, I think, but I'll take a lot of experimentation.
Right. And that, is really the difference between the simplicity pattern that says 3 hours and, kind of what you and I are interested in, frankly. What I'm interested in and what we're talking about is the necessity to kind of lean into experimenting and lean into what you consider failures, and then come back and say, okay, so there must have been something I learned in that. And then, press yourself to understand that, so that you take that, again, as I said, having like the 5 or 6 things from a style point of view I always want to repeat. I probably wouldn't make a list, but there's probably a list of, these are not necessarily the things that you feel comfortable with or that you think are really right for you, even though you think they look so great on other people.
And that's fine. I have learned to really appreciate, there's a gal who's been a student of mine on and off for years, and she and I often have traded patterns, and because what works for her generally works for me, but she can do all of these full hemmed things and I cannot. And so it took me a long time to figure out why I feel that that's true. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It's about me, because when I have something on that's really full at that knee or under the knee level, I just feel really awkward.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
and that again, in terms of wearing feedback, is certainly something to pay attention to, is just we do sometimes feel awkward in what
yes,
we have on, right?
yeah,
Like we're wearing someone else's clothes.
right, exactly. Or the clothes are wearing us.
Right.
Or sometimes it's just like, I just don't feel good about myself in this.
Yeah.
And if you can do a little detective work to figure out why,
Yeah.
you'll slowly build a body of knowledge about what it is that does work for you. So a master pattern is great for gauging what total circumference you need, say in a skirt, in a master pattern for pants, that's your crotch curve. Your crotch curve is probably not going to change unless you have some sort of ethnic pant, or where you have a really different silhouette. If you have a master pattern for a relatively slim pant and you're going to a trouser, yes, your crotch curve might change, but that basic style of pants that you feel comfortable in, your crotch curve is your crotch curve. So you could you may find a pattern that has some other interesting things going on. You think, I want to try it. Well, probably you're going to want to keep your own crotch curve in that. So for skirts and pants, it's great to see the hip circumference, get a closer idea of what you need at the waist. And for the bodices, I think really it's from center front over to your armhole placement, and then from center front over the bust to the side, what you need for that, and then again at the hip. So at least you have a more educated guess as to what size you're going to start with that commercial pattern. If you're full busted or you're very small busted, you may find that, again, with experience, that it is really beneficial to you to do a full bust adjustment or a small bust adjustment. And for full busted gals, I think that, and I'm speaking to them because just statistically, there are more full busted gals than small busted gals, but the distance from center front over the bust to the side seam, that is one element, but what you really need to be concentrating on is the projection. So the dart or the princess seam, that you have the fullness in the garment is accommodating the actual bust. And so I have plans to make a free YouTube video about how do you gauge what that full bust adjustment should be using a pattern on yourself. But you can get some idea whether you actually need a full bust adjustment. Most gals who need FBAs know that they do.
Mm-hmm. Great. Good. Anything else that we're thinking of with master patterns that we haven't kind of talked about? The only other thing I would probably add in, I know might be jumping around a little bit today, is that, you know, I'm petite, so I also find hem length on upper body garments to be critical. And you talked a little bit about how for you, you know that you need a different length when you're wearing a skirt than you are with pants. Are there any ideas you have about kind of playing with that or understanding that or experimenting that with that?
With both my t-shirt master pattern and my darted bodice master pattern, I almost always cut to the longest length.
Mm.
And then when I've made the garment up, then I start to play with the hemline.
Mm.
And I started to do this when I was doing so much custom work, because I learned the hard way that somebody would say, oh, I like my tops here. But then I would do it in, fabric X, and they would go, oh, this really needed to be a little bit longer because of the print or the plaid motif or something. So for me, I usually cut my bodices to my shirts, t-shirt, woven shirt, to the longest length. And then I play around with the hem length.
Okay.
And it's not as fast because I have to spend that time in front of the mirror experimenting with it. I might have to put on 2 or 3 different pairs of pants or jeans or skirts, but it lets me see in actuality where I'm going to want that hem. And there are times I cut it long and I end up cutting 5 inches off of it.
Yeah.
But if I were using a super expensive fabric, I probably wouldn't do that. But in most everyday garments, that 5 inches isn't going to make or break the bank for me. And I think for a good number of people, it's not really going to make a big difference.
Right.
But I like that feeling. Sometimes I don't have enough fabric, so I'll only make it, I don't have the full 5 inches of length that I play in that space I tend to play with, but I might only have 3, or I'll think, okay, I'll cut it as long as I can.
Right.
And then I will play around with it. And once the garment is made, and see what hem length I like. And then I can shape the hem if I want. I usually cut my hems so that they're straight down. And then shirt tailing it is something I do in front of the mirror. And that's a design change, side slits.
Right. Yeah, that's really helpful advice, because I find that makes a small difference can make a big change for how I look. And I really liked your ideas of trying it on with a variety of bottoms, because it certainly does change a lot for me. So that's great advice.
For me, it does. And I think for a lot of people, it does.
Yeah.
So I think one other thought about master patterns is that I've had some students talk to me. It certainly has happened to me. I've bought a pattern and I think I really am going to need to just make the pattern, and I'll put my master pattern on it to get some gauge of widths, center, front, over, like I just talked about. And then as I'm looking at the pattern itself, I realize that there's really not that much going on that is unique to that commercial pattern. And sometimes then that leads me to say, this is just a really interesting neckline, or they've used a facing an exterior facing or band coming down in a certain way that has captured my imagination. So I will have bought the pattern. I'll start playing around with it in relative to my master pattern. And in the long run, I'll say, I can do that. And so it teaches me that aspect. I might buy a pattern and say, I really wonder how they did that knot. Is that something I can create? And it's a learning experience for me. And sometimes I go, nope, I'm going to use the commercial pattern. And sometimes I go, oh, I think I could create that. Sometimes I just want to see what a pattern shape is like. So if you have a peplum, what's the shape of that peplum? If it's a flounced peplum and say it has a cute little pleat in the inverted pleat in the back, I might say to myself, rather than fiddle around with creating that from the get-go, why don't I just buy the commercial pattern? I can see what that pattern shape is like.
Right.
So
it's a study tool is really what I hear.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
That's cool.
I wish I'd thought about that phrase. It's a study tool.
You can trademark that
from now on. I can use study tool. But yes, you're using it to help educate yourself.
Yeah. And then I mean, all of us that sew have looked at pattern pieces forever, right? And so it is really interesting when you have a commercial pattern and you look at it and you think, wow, is that how that's done? You either have no approach to it or you're just shocked because you expected it was something else. So there's value in that, in looking at what a designer created and how they pulled it off.
Yes. And there are times I've bought patterns and just because how did they do that? And I'll make the commercial pattern up just to understand it.
Right. That's neat.
It's a study tool. I'm broadening, hopefully I'm broadening the way I think about patterns and manipulation of them.
Yeah. And I mean, there are so many great designers that to be able to have access to that as a home sewer is really amazing, that we can open that up and put it on your cutting table and just look at it, even if you don't use it or you use it to create a garment that perhaps isn't right for you, but it's a way to manipulate the fabric and understand, oh, that's how that happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
And at the same time, I think there's we can certainly go down that road, and it's very, very worthwhile and road to go down, and is an amazing tool that we can buy designer patterns and make them up and see what they're like. On the other hand, there are times I look at a pattern and I think that's just a really cool neckline. Or that's a really cool way to do X, Y, or Z. And I often have to remind myself that it looks great in the drawing, it looks great on the model, but I don't know how that's going to translate to my body.
Right.
And so very often I'll say, well, I'll put my mock-up of my master pattern on and think about blocking it out. I use that term a lot, block out the neckline, block out an interesting yoke shape. Do I like that on myself, or does that, it might be like a really curved yoke here. And I'll think, oh, actually that doesn't look so good on me. But there's something about it that I try then to understand what sparked my imagination when I saw the pattern illustration or when I see any kind of design. And so it's taking that design element that captured your imagination and translating it for your own body and your own proportions and your own sense of design. As we talked about, we're all designing. We have big name designers who can teach us a lot and we can learn a lot from them, but we in fact are designing.
Right. I like that idea about identifying what it is that inspires you or kind of draws your eye. And then, I guess what I would think right now is it would be fun to just, catalog that, or, because one of the things I noticed that I like a lot are curving shapes. Even if it may not look good on me, just a line that moves is particularly appealing, I think, on a human body.
I agree. I feel that I've thought about curving lines when I am drafting. I use a fashion ruler or a very form ruler much more than I use my straight edge ruler, unless I have something like a shoulder seam where I know my shoulder seam is straight. But I tend to use a curved ruler. And I think for me, it's because we don't have hard angles in our bodies. We're a fluid shape. One line flows into the other. And that's my sense of what's beautiful. And I feel like my ruler work can enhance that. I can make it look more interesting.
Right.
That makes me think of a really good use for a master pattern skirt is to you can use pictures that you've seen or a commercial pattern, or you can just play with it yourself, taking just some sort of shape, you and me, a curve that comes from high hip down across the body diagonally. And it can be a wavy line, and then you can have a second one that comes not even all the way across, but just a little bit. And what you're playing with then is the shape of your line, the undulation of it, and how that plays off of the curviness or straightness of your own body. But we're also talking about visual proportion. So are we breaking up the body in a skirt like that? Are we breaking it up with one line? And what does that do to visual proportion? Or if we put the second line that's coming from side seam just over into the hem of the front, does that create a different sort of visual proportion that we like better? And so again, we're coming down to what is pleasing to our eye in terms of visual proportion. And everybody is different because we're all different widths, we're different heights, we have different necks, we have different head shapes and sizes. All of that makes a difference. And that's where, to me, it's so exciting once you play with a great class would be if people wore skirts, to say everybody developed a line with, it's just color blocking or seaming with some sort of embellishment on it, and see how different it would be for different shaped bodies.
Yes. And also, I mean, that's just unique, right? And that's a lot of what I think also as home sewers want is to play with things that are unique, is to do something different. I'm also it's funny reflecting on the fact that when we are using our master pattern and creating our master pattern, we are all gridded up, right? And we're really thinking horizontal, vertical. And then, that's really fun because then when you get to design, that's already been done, right? You have the fit based on that. The grain is lined up, and now you get to just play.
And that's how I think of it, is it's play. And it doesn't have to be right the first time, and it doesn't have to be right to anybody else. It just is that feeling of, yes, that's good for me, or it is something I want to try.
Right. That's fun.
Oh, this has been lovely to talk to you about master patterns.
I feel like we could go on forever, but
you and I probably could, but our listeners and viewers probably can't.
Right.
So thank you very much, Kris.
Thank you, Sarah.
Totally enjoyable. And for those of you watching this, Kris and I are going to do a few more conversations. If you have an idea, maybe you want to talk to me and have a conversation, I am totally open to that too. And thank you for joining us. Thanks, Kris.
Bye, Sarah. Thank you.